So today on Keen Yoga, we have Jenna Longoria, a nutritionist and specializing in women's health, and also an authorized Ashtanga yoga teacher. So in a prime position to have a little chat about women and all things yoga and the practice of Ashtanga, because in Ashtanga we know that often we found as teachers, we all push ourselves hard, and women also push themselves hard, and often end up seeing the same faces, the same female faces in the room all week, every week, month after month. And you start asking yourself questions of, are they taking no time off? What's happening with the menstruation? Traditionally we were told take a few days off. Maybe you talk to them, maybe you're familiar with them, maybe you're not. And you start, hearing that maybe that people are losing periods, losing their menstruation cycle, and many, not just that, but many other things. So after a heated debate online, we have Jenna here today to discuss further how maybe we might approach this subject as a woman, which I'm evidently not. So I'm now going to shut up for a minute and defer to Jenna. So yes, I mean.
You're not a womb holder, but you do know a lot about the Ashtanga yoga practice, about anatomy. So I feel like that gives you, you should be able to chime in and talk about it as well, especially as a teacher.
Well,
I'm sure you have female students.
I was being humble there. I do give it a good go when I can, Yes, and I've heard a lot, about, as I said, about this subject from women, and I've always, to correct any mistaken views about what I was saying on my post is not that I believe that that everyone, man or women, should practice all the time every day. I think that we, men as well as women, obviously women have more evident cycles. Men, I think, also have cycles, and the practice should respect our ebb and flow of our natural life, which is, nature is cyclical and not simply linear. So, it feels obvious that, we all cycle through and should, have time of rest and time of, not pushing ourselves, but, turning the frequency up a bit. Nevertheless, we find that, we're encouraged to progress in the system, and people don't want, they get addicted, to it, rather, dare I say, compulsive, and don't want to take that time off. And having spoken to other people like Nia Ferrier, who talks a lot about female cycles, it's becoming clearer and clearer that there are very, very correlated phases in a woman's body as to strength and tiredness and not hormonal, everything, So, I suppose, the long and short of it was what I was saying perhaps in the post was, I don't feel as a man we can legislate your, not, and certainly it's a too personal question to ever ask, when are you menstruating? It's obviously should never be asked to a female student, but nevertheless, we kind of want to know that the person is respecting their own body just as I would a man's. But I would not say I want to dictate you have to take this time off, or you have to take this time off as soon as you come into menstruation. Because I think what a couple of the female practitioners were saying on the post I wrote, which you can go back if you want anyone to look at this post, which was just on Ashtanga myths in general, but blew up about women in the end, and Ashtanga myths. That the myth is that it's always on the first day of period, you take the first 3 days off. And now, as I understood it from other women, that it doesn't necessarily happen that way. And some women find it, more relevant that to take the time off beforehand when they feel terrible, and then when they actually start to have their menstruation, they feel strong and fine again, So,
can I interrupt for a second about something?
I'm trying to allow you to speak.
What you just said when they feel terrible. And you're like, take off when they feel terrible. And
right.
a lot of women do feel terrible around their menstrual cycle or leading up to their menstrual cycle. But the goal is to not feel terrible. The goal is to have an effortless menstrual cycle, to ebb and flow in between, as you said, and men have cycles, females and males have cycles. Females are on a 28-day-ish infradian rhythm cycle, whereas men are more on a linear 24-hour cycle. And so the idea is when females, I'm going to talk about females, are in harmony with their cycles and the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, as you said, Nia was talking about the 4 phases, it shouldn't be such a drama, painful event to where getting into Marichyasana D is just horribly excruciating a few days before your period. If that's the case, then there's definitely an imbalance But I do agree there's never a black or white. There's always a gray, just like the phases of the menstrual cycle. It's not like one day you wake up and you're like, I'm in the next phase. So we have the menstrual phase, the follicular phase, the luteal phase, and the menstrual phase. And depending on what our hormones are doing for each phase, it influences our appetite, our mood, our stamina, our libido. But it's not like you just wake up one day and you're like, I'm in the follicular phase, and you feel it. There's a transition, just like in the asanas. There are transitions, and they're not to be skipped or missed or rushed through. And that's the same thing with the phases of our menstrual cycle. And so, yeah, for some females, ovulation is an event that causes them discomfort, which we need to get to the root cause of that eventually. Why is ovulation causing you discomfort? And ovulation is mid-cycle. That is, when we release an egg, usually around day-ish 14, but not always, somewhere around there. And then for some females, it causes discomfort, and they might want to kind of take it easier in binds, or maybe take a lighter practice. Maybe their menstruation is actually not an event that brings them any discomfort. So I think it's very individual. And so one thing I'm glad that we get to talk about today is that, like, it's not, a teacher should never be a dictator. A teacher just kind of sees the potential in a student, pushes them in a good way, but also at the same time allows for space for the student to kind of draw outside the lines. And then you can just give your input and your thoughts, and what they want to do is what they're going to ultimately do, and on their journey of self-exploration. So by any means, like, I'm not going to have a student, if they're menstruating, say, leave, for a lot of females, being in the yoga shala is a really nurturing, grounding event of their day, and they want to keep the routine. So perhaps doing something like like Iyengar has a asana sequence for the menstrual cycle, like doing that, or doing other asanas, or if they want to practice because they feel better practicing, then they practice. But I just do feel like it is something to be spoken about, especially just to know and bring awareness to the cycles that we're not expected, especially females. We don't have the same energy levels every day. We don't have the same stamina every day. So maybe, the week leading up to your menstrual cycle might not be the best time to workshop your TikToks a lot, and bring yourself to exhaustion, because that's when an injury is going to happen. Maybe hold back. And then after menstruation, when your hormones begin to rise and you have more stamina and strength, go for it.
Do you think it's in part being kind of co-opted into a kind of rather patriarchal view, or a linear view of the system, where, men just kind of push all the time, and, and then women, kind of assume that they want to keep up with the men, they're equal and they're as strong as the men, so that they kind of act similarly?
Yes, I love what you're saying. So I feel like there's been this move with feminism where we're moving into something called egalitarian feminism, where that is when you see these females saying, I can do anything a male can do. I can do anything you can do. But why do we want to? For me, I'm like, why do I want to mold myself into a 24-hour linear male regime? Like, that's not how we work. And so if I'm trying to mold myself, sure, I can do it, because females are amazing and incredible, and we can do pretty much anything we put our minds to. But that's also losing who we are as women and as these cyclical beings. Like, we just don't work on that 9 to 5, 24-hour cycle, where men kind of work with the sun. They wake up, their testosterone's high, it dwindles as they get into the afternoon and the evenings, they're tired, they shut off. We don't work that way. We do that in 28-ish days. So this applies into the workspace, and if you're an entrepreneur, into your projects, your creative projects, your business work. This applies to life, and this applies to your practice as well.
Yeah.
And so, so like you're saying, it's a patriarchal, it's gotten to.
Why would you want to?
Yeah, exactly. Why would you want to? But I get it, because I know, and the Instagram post got a little bit heated, and the topic is triggering, and I probably shouldn't have applied the third reply. I should have left it at the second one. But I got, I found myself getting triggered too, and I really had to go in and be like, why am I getting triggered? And it's because it is a triggering subject, because we have the female pain body as a collective. We have been, suppressed and,
told what
persecuted
to do. Right,
and told what to do.
Constantly told what to do about your body. So this is a time to say, like, well, now, I mean, really, no one, and women are also saying, like, that you have to take these days off, right? And that, kind of regurgitating the kind of telling to themselves again now, rather than saying, like, here it is for our experience of ourselves. And I get heated about this as well, because the current, trend of cesareans, right? It's just one more example of men taking jurisdiction over every element of a female's body. And this has been happening, and it's just frustrating. And I just don't want to see this same patriarchal view being thrust into the yoga scene as well. To say, like, definitely we all need to take time out, now we all need to listen to our bodies, and we all need to stop pushing ourselves so hard. Now, I consider we could practice yoga every day. Now, just before I let you speak again, one of the other people on the thread was saying, well, I actually feel better when I'm, when I'm in that phase of my cycle, in the menstruation phase. I feel better doing some stretches. It feels better for me, and I think that just taps into the fact, well, how, when I say a women can practice Ashtanga every day, I mean, like, I don't mean women can practice Ashtanga and push themselves to the hub, to the nail, and do the TikToks and everything. I mean, a woman can practice, if she wants to practice in the style of Ashtanga, anytime they want to. I mean, because my grandmother can. Because all that means, is following breath, following vinyasa, and following a rough, very rough, maybe completely look nothing like the rough outline of sequences, right? However those postures may manifest, right? You can modify them so they might look nothing like the posture itself, but the energy is still there. So to that end, if a woman wants to practice, at any point, I kind of feel that that's I don't necessarily think it's necessary, but I think it's quite possible. If we look at Ashtanga in a much more broad focus, but if we say Ashtanga is this, Ashtanga is simply pushing as hard as you can and completing the postures to the ideal version of the postures, then, well, no, that's ridiculous. But then no one should be doing that every day anyway.
I agree. And I feel like Ashtanga has gotten kind of that rap of being a type A personality practice, and people that push hard, go big or go home. That's kind of the stereotype sometimes we get.
That's a good one.
But you find when you speak to practitioners who've been doing this a long time, decades, they're the ones who color outside of the lines a little bit and have learned to adapt it or make it a more individualized practice. Which I really appreciate.
Which is what it is. I mean, that's the frustrating thing. I mean, we talk about yoga in general now and slightly off topic, but I mean, Ashtanga yoga is just it's just talking about sequences. Other than that, it's just yoga, and if as another woman made a point on the post, I think, if I can get up and walk around and do daily tasks, then surely I can practice yoga, which could be a lot less strenuous, could be a lot less strenuous. But
here's the thing. So I know you were saying, I know that you love to have, research to back up these claims and debate.
Right. Yeah.
But in regards to bringing it back to the menstrual cycle, in regards to the practice and adapting it, and whether you should do inversions or not, or whether you should take off 3 strict days of rest, as some people say, if you're bleeding, some women bleed for 8 days, which first of all, we need to figure out why you're bleeding that long. That's not normal.
Yeah. We're going to go back to that. Yeah.
But it is so highly individual, and having that body awareness, which the practice gives you, allows you to understand what works for you. And I do believe moving your body is better, especially if you're having cramping. And there has, been what you'll find is, yes, there's no research study to show if inversions affect a female menstrual cycle. I'm not surprised, because it's been made abundantly clear that women's health is not priority in research funding. So I don't expect a research study of that caliber happening anytime soon. If it was, do inversions cause male impotence, then there'd probably be a study already.
I'd be loads of that.
Exactly. It's such, and so there have been very generic studies. There's been a few studies on yoga asanas and alleviating cramps, one of which showed that cobra, cat, and fish pose alleviate. Those are the 3 asanas that they studied. They alleviate menstrual cramps. There's another study that showed that yoga asanas reduced menstrual cramps as well. They didn't do any particular asanas in the study. And so that's really what we have. All the other yoga studies are really on mental health, and they're combined both sexes. It's nothing on inversions. So we kind of have to go back. All we have are the ancient healing modalities, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, what the yoga masters before us have said, and teachers, and from, you know, learning from our teachers and what they've been told. That's really all we have. We don't have any studies. And what we can do is we can apply what we know, what science has shown. For instance, in our menstrual phase, we are lower on minerals. We lose a lot of minerals during that time. Our sex hormones are at their lowest, testosterone, estrogen, very low. Our stamina is lower. We can overheat, and our stamina is lower. So what does that say if we're doing, you know, if we're tired and then we're pushing ourselves in these asanas, there can be injury. But no, I mean, nothing has ever shown that inversions are going to arrest blood flow. All we have is what Ayurveda says with apana and prana vayu. And, you know, when we're trying to go to the bathroom, we're not going to hold our bandhas, right? I mean, if we're menstruating, then holding our bandhas. And for I know a lot of female practitioners say that, like, they can't, it's not even an option to do advanced asanas when they're menstruating. Well, that's
that's another question about bandha and how you hold them and what they are, right? So, you know, and again, it comes back to the point that bandha doesn't mean clenching your abs. That's nothing to do with bandha. It's a more subtle feeling, right? And, you know, and it's more of a feeling of awareness. And I don't think that the lock has to be hard. And you know, and as it's practiced, because I think I'd say there's a general misconception that bandha is a clenching of the rectus abdominis, which is not. And secondly, I think that, I would never advise someone who's trying, you know, who's going through this point in the cycle, who's obviously trying to, you know, let the work of apana do its job, let's say, to squeeze in any capacity that region. But I think you can do yoga. You know, you can do yoga without. You know,
absolutely, there's so many asanas that you could do
without bandha. You don't have
menstruating.
Yeah. But the other thing, you know, I mean, again, I look at bandha more as just as a focus of awareness, not necessarily an actual, even like, you know, a kind of energetic focus, not even a necessarily mechanical, physical process all the time. But I mean, coming back more to specifically to the other point that you mentioned here, which was the inversions in women's cycles. I'm just going to say a quick plug for Andrew McGonagall's book, who I've also done some work with. He's a doctor. He's a medical doctor. He's called Dr. Yogi in social media. He's written a great new book about yoga and from a medical standpoint, at which he cites loads of studies, and pretty much, you know, it's kind of funny because every time pretty much, I don't know whether he even cites, there may even be a study that he mentions about female cycles inversions. I'm not sure. I don't think so. But pretty much every time it's like a study comes back. I couldn't
find anything. So if he did have one, I'd be very curious.
Maybe look at his book. I can't remember the title of his book.
I couldn't find anything on inversions.
Yeah. But it always comes back, you know, the study proved inconclusive, you know, and I think, you know, pretty much often that is the case. It's like, well, you know, some people this way and some people find it this way, and, you know, and we don't know all the mitigating factors around that, you know. So I think, you know, I mean, we ought to be cautious probably anyway in taking our reasoning from a medical study when we're actually not generalized people, but individuals, you know. But, you know, aside from that, I suppose I can't speak, obviously, from a woman's perspective, from a woman's experience, but I feel like, I mean, what we do know is that how would you say, contraflow that, you know, does happen to a woman anyway during the day, that, you know, like downward dog is also an inversion, and that there's going to be many times during the day that a woman might turn themselves the other way around, you know, picking up the children, et cetera, right? So I think, you know, 30 seconds of a shoulder stand or a headstand, I kind of feel, you know, these days...
Well, my question is, why do you want to? I mean, like,
why would you want to? Well, if you did,
well,
exactly. I mean, that's a good question in itself, and I'm totally in agreement with that question. But, you know,
we have this practice 6 days a week, minus the moon days if you take them.
Yeah, I suppose it's just another example of wrapping fragility as applied to a woman. That that we need to kind of bind a woman's experience, wrap them up in cotton wool, and say you can or can't do this because you're too fragile, you know. And
that's not what it is. It's not that you're too fragile. No. It's not that we're too.
But I say,
I think females are the stronger. I really think we're.
I agree. They are the stronger, and there's actually studies done. There's no doubt about that. The skeleton is actually stronger, and women are stronger in the long term, stamina wise, and in many capacities, they are actually the stronger let's say if we're an animal, which I don't believe we are anyway, but if we were an animal, they are the stronger of the two, right? But nevertheless, say you missed, for example, say you missed a whole bunch of days. You want to do your full practice, right? Or you simply just want to do it. But I don't know. Maybe you'd want to turn yourself upside down. I mean, like as you say, like what's the point? You could say the same thing about any of it, really. Like why would you? But say you did. Who's to tell you not to? That's, I suppose, my argument.
I don't think anyone's been telling anyone.
Especially these days, where the reason in the first place was, this problem around women's hygiene, right? Which we have very strongly in, particularly in India, around bleeding. In all cultures actually, like around bleeding and menstruation and all this stuff. It's archaic these days. What we have, the capacity out there to stem blood flow, to deal much more easily with sanitary issues. It's just patriarchal and archaic in my mind, and it's kind of frustrating that that I think the mentalities that are still stuck in with these kind of biases and prejudice and calling it something else. As
I said, with the egalitarian feminism, we're going about it the wrong way. After the Me Too movement, after everything, we got angry and triggered. Our voices were finally heard in this bubble of awareness with the Me Too movement. And it's sometimes it's created a lot of anger, rightly so, because it shook up the pain body and all of these females from not just our generation, many generations. But it's going about it by trying to make ourselves into small men to show that we can do whatever they can is not the way to do it. I choose to embrace my beautiful female biology. I choose to embrace my strengths, that in my follicular phase, I have amazing creative ideas, more so because what my hormones are doing, and I have great business ideas. And in my luteal phase, it's a time to kind of bring everything to a close and, bring those ideas to fruition. That if I were working in a typical 9-to-5 office place, that's not how it would necessarily work. I love to be able to shorten my office hours in the luteal phase, not see clients my last week, because that's just really time for me to finish projects. Like where I don't want to bring myself into this male dominated world and put myself into this, like into a square peg if I'm, round. That to me is not equality. That is me becoming something that I'm not. And
it's actually the reverse of equality, isn't it? It's actually that saying your validity is in your masculinity.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing with I don't menstruate, or we can even bring it to the birth control pill. My hormones are like this now with the birth control pill. I'm more like a man, and I'm more like, I don't menstruate, doesn't get in the way of my life, whatever. These are our superpowers. As females, these hormones that we have that ebb and flow over the 28 days, they are our superpowers. Men, I'm really sorry for men that you don't have this ebb and flow like we do.
I think there is one. I'm sorry that it's not recognized, or that there's no more. There's not more of a structure around it, because it would be nice to recognize it. As you say, there's many things that you want to celebrate as a woman, not try and deny or shove under the carpet. It reminds me of a funny story of I think many years ago, one of the senior teachers in the early days of the Lakshmi Puram Shala, they discovered that they were asking Patabi Joyce, where's Amma? Where's his wife? And where's Saraswati? And I don't know whether he just kind of muttered something uncomfortably, or whether he told them, they're up there. And then they came to realize that, for a number of, I don't know how many days it was, at least 3 days, I think, every month, there was a certain place in a back room in a house, or a room upstairs, actually. It wasn't like a prison room with no windows, but where they were, and, on their cycle. And first of all, this particular teacher was kind of outraged. He said, well, how could they, how could you shut them away for these days, when they're having this, right? That's just ludicrous, And then he talked to Amma and Saraswati and said, we love it. This is the few days that we don't have to do any housework. We don't have to do any work. We can just read magazines, do our nails, do all the stuff we want to together, just chill out.
Yep. Absolutely.
Why would we want to not have those days?
My host mother told me the same thing in Mysore on my second trip. And she was like, don't tell everyone, like, don't ruin it for us. You know, I know y'all like to just go out and do whatever you want on your menstrual cycle, and don't ruin it for us. She's like, these are the 3 days I don't need to cook. I don't need to clean. I get my privacy, which is a beautiful time because especially during menstruation, our intuition is very high. In past cultures and indigenous cultures, Native American cultures, they would bring the women who were menstruating, and usually they cycled up at the same time and were menstruating with the new moon. They would bring them all together in a hut, and they would meditate, and they would be in these, and then they would ask these women, what messages did you receive? I mean, it was a very honorable event, and they looked at the females as these kind of spiritual, you know, vessels, especially during that time. And so, I mean, I know that there are some cultures where we hear these awful stories, these period huts in Africa and places where they die and they're malnourished. That's awful. That's not the type of ceremony we're talking about that have happened in other cultures during menstruation. And I know, and that goes to the fact that like a lot of females don't want to be told what to do. They don't want to be treated differently than a male. And so they see that as non-equality, or they see that as patriot, you know, like the patriarchy telling them what to do. But then, you know, when we look back at Western cultures, are we really that equal? I mean, like, look how we after a woman gets a C-section, how quickly she's expected to go back to work. But yet we're like so like aware of female rights and equality. And it's just, you know, I feel like we to judge one culture versus another, we all have downfalls. But coming back to, you know, just being, you know, I get it. When I first started practicing, I really disliked the fact that it was frowned upon to practice while menstruating. I wanted to practice all the time. I was so excited about the practice, especially as when we first find it, you know, we're just so, oh my gosh, I love it. I can't wait for the next asana, and I don't want to miss a day. And especially when you're in Mysore, you don't want to miss 3 days with Shirachi. You know, maybe I can get a new pose, like, right? Like, it's just, and then you realize, I remember one trip, I really loved it. He called out, he saw some practitioner, and he was like, you've been here 3 months. I haven't seen you take 1 day off. He was like, you know, winter ladies holiday. And I remember, like, to me, talking about a period, which in so many cultures is taboo so openly, I really respected that, because like, I feel like it's something we should talk more. Like, I know earlier you said, you know, if I have a student, you know, I'm not going to tell them what to do maybe during menstruation, or I'm not going to ask them if they're menstruating. I would like to see an environment where we feel comfortable talking to male teachers about our menstruation, where they know, like, maybe, so then when they're seeing that maybe we're a little, you know, tired or off, like, oh, they're just, you know, maybe about a week off from their moon. Yeah. So that's why, or having an awareness of where their hormone levels are, where also gives them insight into their practice. And as a teacher, I would say, so I feel like every male teacher should have a basic understanding of the four phases.
It's an interesting point. Yeah, it's an interesting point, because it definitely impacts the way, you know, that one might relate to a female student. It seems, you know, it does seem an intimate relation to have. So, you know, perhaps that's something.
It's just like blowing your nose or going to the bathroom. It's the most natural thing ever. Like, that's what I want to see dropped. The taboo of hush hush. Even the fact, I don't even like to call it ladies' holiday anymore. I feel like that euphemism is very.
I think it's a euphemism, which I totally agree with. Yeah, why do we need to? Why do we need to wrap? Yeah, we wrap it up in something which needs to be, you know, used to, you know, in other terms. It's I've never liked that. I agree. I wanted to ask you also, though. I mean, you mentioned a number of times about this that you might have ideas about how to lessen the symptoms. I mean, I see a lot of your social media about, you know, the periods that menstruation shouldn't necessarily be such an ordeal, that it shouldn't, you know, that there shouldn't be such a suffering surrounding it, right? And I was personally interested to hear more about that, having known many women and known, you know, many women that have suffered a great deal, you know, during their cycle at different periods. Like, you know, I think, you know, although it's not immediately related to asana, perhaps it is.
How, it can be, in a way.
What advice can you give? You know, if people, you know, because it isn't. You know, I mean, you said in the last post, I think this is not normal. You know, to have all this pain around periods.
We've normalized it. Society has normalized
it. Right. Okay.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I would say is, our period is our fifth vital sign, our menstrual cycle. So for females, we have this extra vital sign as a report card of, hey, every month Are we eating well? Are we moving our bodies enough? Too much? Too little? Are we living in line just with, are we overworking? Are we overstressed? Every month, our period is that report card that tells us, what's going on.
Right.
So, ideally a period, which a period is the days you're bleeding, the days you're actually bleeding. And that should be anywhere between 3 to 7 days. Anything less than 3 days is too little. Anything less over 7 is too much. So there's definitely an imbalance in the body. We should only be losing, really 25 to 85 milliliters of blood, ideally around 50 milliliters. Anything less than 25 milliliters, there's a deficiency, there's an issue. And anything more than 80, there's definitely a deficiency, and you're at risk for, iron deficiencies, and because you're bleeding so much. And then, it should be pain-free. And when I say pain-free, a little bit of mild cramping on the first, maybe second day is normal. Like perhaps a heating pad gets rid of that. Or if you have to take a painkiller and it goes away, then I would say that would be I'm not saying it needs to be all unicorns and rainbows, like, oh, pain-free, I can do whatever. There might be some mild discomfort. I mean, your uterine lining is shedding. You grew this organ in 28 days, this endometrial lining, it's shedding. So you're going to feel some things. And so that's what a normal period is looking like. That's our report card. You ovulate mid-cycle. So things that can cause delayed ovulation. So there's no late period. So our menstrual cycle is anywhere between, which is the whole event, is anywhere from 25 to 35 days. So that's really what we're looking for the whole event. And then the period, which is the bleed, anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And so things that can cause delayed ovulation are stress, whether internal, environmental, emotional, over exercising, under eating, nutrient deficiencies. All of these things can cause jet lag, illness, can cause delayed ovulation. So there's a lot of external factors and variables in our environment that affect our menstrual cycle. So it's a great barometer. So with your practice, you can check in. So if your period is late, or if you're not ovulating, or you're ovulating late, or you have a super heavy period or non-existent bleed, then that's your body's way of saying something's out of balance. So maybe it might not be your practice. Maybe it's you need to eat a little bit more of a certain nutrient or not, or maybe you have a lot of stress going on, or it could be this practice you're doing every day. Who knows? So maybe experiment with I'm going to take it easy the last few days before my menstrual cycle. I'm not going to cut my practice short if I don't want to, but maybe I won't just go with it as much intensity as I usually do. Notice how you feel after you practice. If you're really tired for the rest of the day after your practice, especially in that luteal phase, which is, a week before your period leading up, see how you feel. Sync every day. I challenge every female listening to this for the full menstrual cycle. See how you feel every day after practice. And I just want you to understand or see and observe, is there any difference in your energy levels? Because if your body will let you know if you maybe overworked one day. If you're tired for the rest of the day and you don't have enough energy for your kids, for your work, for life, then maybe you overdid it in the practice a little bit and just needed to tone it back. If the first 3 days, pardon?
Sorry, I was going to say, do you have any experience with people keeping a diary, maybe, to see how?
I think that would be a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
I mean, I always have my clients, because I'm working with clients regulating their hormones and menstrual cycles, chart their cycles, write about their feeling, even if it's just 1 or 2 words a day for one full menstrual cycle. And I think what a beautiful way, if you're an Ashtangi, to also add that to your practice and how you felt and just noticing oh, wow, when do you feel, how does that apply to your asana practice? I think that would bring a lot of awareness and insight to your strengths in the practice, and also letting you know your weaknesses or when you're vulnerable for injuries. We all know women are more vulnerable to ACL injuries around ovulation. And that is one research study that they have. They have a lot of studies on the ACL and the high estrogen. And so just knowing, especially in Ashtanga, that can be in any female athlete, that can be an injury, any athlete, but Just bringing that awareness and the journaling. I think that would be a beautiful activity for any Ashtanga or yoga, any type of yoga practitioner.
Yeah.
How does your body respond and feel, and how can you best support your body? Because ultimately that's ahimsa, right? Like taking care of yourself and nurturing yourself.
Yeah. To that end, I wanted to ask you specifically, I mean, there are many women out there, I know many women that were listening probably, that will have either experienced or be in the current situation of not having a menstruation, right? I mean, what does this mean? You know, let's be perhaps candidly honest as to, you know, the importance of this and what this might mean going forward, right? If your cycle is stopped.
That's so common. It's so common. And I know, like,
is this a real cause for concern? Is it dangerous?
Yes,
What
a
might
cause
that mean
for
in the
concern.
long term? Right.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a cause for concern. Just, you know, I personally, I remember the first 3 years I practiced Ashtanga, I had like 4 periods.
Oh, wow.
The whole time. I was doing a lot of things that I look back at now. I'm like, okay, that makes sense.
Right.
And I remember hearing a lot of women in Mysore, as you do, and you're chatting over chai and dosas and talking about menstrual cycles. And, oh, yeah, no, I don't have periods either. You know, some women, you know, had like hormone imbalances or, you know, were like having issues. And then others were like, oh, yeah, it doesn't bother me because I don't have to take off for practice. Others were more concerned. So I really liked maybe to get pregnant eventually. Can I get pregnant if I haven't had a period for 2 years? And so, yeah, it is a very, ovulation is a very important event for females. We need to ovulate to be healthy. It's how we make, it's how we protect our bones. So when we ovulate, we make a hormone called progesterone. And every year, researchers have found that we don't ovulate, we lose 1% bone density. And then we do know how important that is. And, you know, we make a lot of this bone density in our early 20s. You know, we kind of stop after, like, I think it's early 20s, you know, we can protect the bone mass that we have, but we make the bulk of it around that age. So imagine if you're not ovulating, or it's precious. It's basically about every month you ovulate, it's like putting money in your health savings account for a female. So every month we're not ovulating, we're making a hormone called progesterone, which helps nourishes our bones, our brain. Progesterone is a calming hormone. It reduces anxiety. It helps us feel calm and nourished. So I often find with clients who aren't ovulating or don't have enough progesterone, they have a lot of issues with anxiety.
Right.
And then it also nourishes our heart. It protects us from heart disease, dementia going forward. So it's really important that we ovulate. If we're not ovulating, that's a sign that our body, imagine if you just didn't go to the bathroom for a year.
Yeah. And it's a sign
that's a natural bodily function.
It
would be concerning. Ovulation is the same way. We need to be ovulating.
Also, if you plan to have kids, then surely not having a period, even if you were to stop the practice saying your periods were reinstated, I mean, there's something, you know, kind of.
If you're not ovulating, first it can impact future fertility. But the thing is, the biggest concern is if you're not ovulating, it means your body is not getting something that it needs. Yeah. That's the biggest thing. So yes, we're not making the hormones that we need for health, which is a big thing as well. Sure, our mental health could suffer, our overall health physical health could suffer. But second of all, it means that there's something in our environment something that is not working. So our ovaries are sensing the environment. So basically we are animals. I agree with you. I think that we just need to come back to that. We are evolutionary. We're here to procreate. That's what we're here to do. And whether you want to or not, whether you want babies now or never. So our ovaries are designed with that goal to sense the environment. Is this environment going to, is it going to nourish? Will a baby survive in this environment or not? So your ovaries are constantly sensing the environment. There's a lot of variables. So if you're malnourished and you're not eating enough, your body's going to get the memo that there's a famine. So it might shut off ovulation because it's not a time to have a baby right now. If there's a lot of stress going on, whether, as we said, there's emotional stress, internal stress, physical stressors, lots of stressors, then your body might say, this is not a time for a baby. And so your ovaries will shut off ovulation, which shuts off your natural cycle of hormones. And so I know it comes down to something as, we don't like to look at ourselves sometimes as just, procreating machines.
If something's meant to be happening and it is not happening, then there's a problem, right? Like, if right, if your eyes don't water when they need to, that's problematic, right? Because that's the function of the eye needs the tear duct, right? Like, so, I mean, I think that's just like de facto, an issue to be, if something is happening with pretty much the species as it is, and then it's not happening with a small proportion that are doing something specific, then, you can think, well, that's probably problematic, in as much as
it affects our practice too. So for the practitioners who are like, really, my practice,
yeah.
like, what can I do to support my practice? Make progesterone, ovulate, nourish your bones, make estrogen, which is going to lubricate your joints. You want to be ovulating in order for that to happen. That's why we see women that are in postmenopause that are, especially practitioners, and there have been some practitioners who really have been sharing their experiencing with practicing during postmenopause. There's a shift in the body because that lack of estrogen. Your joints are more achy and dry. And why do we want to feel like that before we need to feel like that?
Yeah.
I mean, there's also...
That's another question, and I'm not sure we have time to go on to the menopause now, but there's definitely another interest of mine, having... I mean, like Ashtanga yoga is not the cool one anymore, right? So, we're getting, older people, as more and more our demographic in Ashtanga, and many of the people I'm teaching now are women, coming up to their perimenopause, menopause, and yet there's so little done, out there around how to adapt practice, right? And
if we nourish our body and we don't have to have a really bad perimenopause and postmenopause, just FYI, like periods don't need to be painful and horrible. Perimenopause and menopause don't need to be painful and horrible either. If you take care of your body and you feed it like how you need to, you nourish your body, you move your body, you really don't need to have such horrible transitions. That's just kind of what we've normalized in society. Oh, menopause. Oh God, poor lady, she's in menopause. Like, it doesn't have to be horrible. Periods don't have to be horrible.
Yeah, and that's a great point to put across. I mean, just to clarify, I wasn't saying that, we have to suffer.
No, I know you're not, but
through menopause and change your practice. More just like that every phase needs every phase of life for a man and a woman needs an adaptation, right? So, coming up to 45 as I am, I would also adapt my practice now as
because as we get I mean, because male hormones are affected too, just over life phases as well. So
apparently so. What about structuring a practice over a month then? Can you give any general guidelines for I mean, this is very interesting for me to hear about how a woman might approach practice straight after menstruation, and then when the time to really turn the frequency up, if one wanted to really try hard for a little while, when that would be. And then you mentioned at the end and maybe toning it down at just before menstruation. I mean, have you got any, and again, as you've made patently clear, every person is a unique individual, and every person is different. But maybe perhaps there's some generalized kind of ideas that you could suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And so over the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle, our hormones ebb and flow, and that does impact, as I said, the stamina levels. So I find the best way to play around with it when you're journaling and you're noticing how you feel after practice as an experiment. No one's telling you to do anything, but if you kind of want to just experiment and see how you feel, the rough guidelines, and of course you're going to find your own magic spot, but our menstrual phase, we're lower on energy. Our hormones are just lower, that's a biological event. I mean, our testosterone, our estrogen, our progesterone are all very low. So that's why, taking rest a few days is really great. I'm not saying don't move and stay in bed. I mean, you could go for a walk or do some light yoga asana flows that feel good and, help move the body and can help relieve cramping. Maybe doing your full practice. I don't know. And I think the area there for female practitioners to focus on is non-attachment. What's going to happen if you take a day off, right? Is the mat not going to be there tomorrow? Is everything going to, are you going to start from square one? What is this attachment? Maybe using it as time to also do some other, limbs like pranayama, or obviously not all of the pranayamas might be good for when you're bleeding, but you know, chanting, these are all beautiful things that a lot of us sacrifice because we're doing our practice and we don't have enough time in the morning to add longer sessions of those on. So maybe focusing on those ways of practicing. And then, you know, after 1 to 3 days of resting and doing that, I generally advise, I think resting for 1 to 3 days is excellent for many reasons. But it might not be for everyone. And I understand that. And then your hormones start to rise. So as your body gears up to ovulation around day 3 or 4 or 5, you'll notice your follicle stimulating hormone, your estrogen, they begin to rise. And that gives you more energy. That gives you more drive, gives you more stamina. Your mineral levels are replenishing, especially if you took care of yourself during your menstruation and you made sure to remineralize and eat nutrient-dense foods. And so then, so you can start to pretty much, a lot of females, especially when their periods are in balance and their menstrual cycles are in balance, they feel well enough by day 3 or 4 to go back at it. I mean, like if your body is in balance after the event, you should start feeling well enough. And then as you get deeper into after menstrual phase ends when you stop bleeding. And the next phase is follicular phase. So this is when your hormones start to rise, as I said, so you're starting to feel more energetic. So this is this could be a gray area. Some women might at day 4, okay, I'm back at it. Some women might need a few more days of softness. Maybe if you practice intermediate, you just do primary the first few days. Listen to your body, whatever works for you. Maybe going back into intermediate or advanced day or whatever your practice is, listen to your body. But as you get further along in the follicular phase, so let's say day 10, cycle day 10, so you're getting closer to ovulation. This is when your estrogen, your testosterone are really at their highest levels. They start to elevate, which helps you burn fat, build muscle. Your stamina is higher. I would say this would be a great time to really maybe workshop on some of the asanas you're practicing. Maybe try them a few more times. Give it your go. Really, this is such a beautiful time. I would say cycle day 10 all the way to the end of ovulation. So say you ovulate on day 16, cycle day 10 to 16 is really your power zone. Kind
of the middle point.
Yes. Yeah. And then for a lot of women, even a few days after ovulation, they're still reaping the benefits of these high levels of hormones. Some women, because of hormone imbalances, might start to feel really bad right after they ovulate. That's another imbalance that needs to be fixed. We shouldn't drop off after we ovulate and feel mood issues and PMS symptoms. But generally, you'll probably have a gray zone after you ovulate. So after you ovulate, you go to your luteal phase, which is your last phase, which is generally the phase where the PMS symptoms can come, all of these dreaded period events, but they don't have to. But generally, a lot of females, especially if their bodies are in balance, they feel great for the first week of their luteal phase. It's not like a complete drop off. And so, I mean, your progesterone levels are higher, your estrogen starts to dip a little bit. So you might notice around, a week before your period. So let's say you have a 28-day cycle around day 20, 21, you might all of a sudden feel a little bit like your stamina is a little bit less. Maybe you're, just a subtle, it doesn't necessarily need to be like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, but it might just be a subtle energy shift. And it's not a time that you want to maybe do an asana 2 or 3 times, or you just want to do your practice. Maybe as you get deeper into that luteal phase, progesterone takes over. Progesterone can do a few things. First of all, it can slow transit time in some women, we get a little bit, you can get constipated and more full because it slows the transit time in our intestines. Not always, but it can. It can make us feel progesterone a little bit more slow moving, or some women get bloated right before they start their period. Ideally, we don't want to be getting really bloated and things like that. So, but if you are, well, then if you're struggling in the few days leading up to your period and you feel a lot of pressure around your womb and your ovaries, don't feel like you need to bind your wrist and all of your, in Pashasana. Maybe have a lighter grip, or lighter, not even grip. When you think of grip, you think of struggle. But take it easier. Give some space, because our uterus doubles in size in our luteal phase right before menstruation. Our uterus doubles. So we need more space in our womb. We don't have. It's normal to have a little bit bigger kind of not big belly, but it's normal to have kind of
yeah.
like a softer belly during that time. So it just makes sense, doesn't it, to just give your womb some more space, listen to your body. If you find yourself, your stamina is lower in the late luteal phase, so you will tire easily. So just make sure you conserve your energy so you're not sloppy at the end and you're prone to injuries, and then repeat the cycle. I mean, that was in a nutshell. That was really quick, but
that's fantastic. I mean, and it kind of seems very useful for all women to to kind of have a little bit more knowledge about this, the whole situation around the cycle, so that one can kind of workshop things and approach things more skillfully. I wish there was as much information around the man's cycle, or but also it's nice to have an ebb and flow. It's nice to have a phase where you're full tilt, and then you go into a different phase. I mean, this seems a very natural way of being, right? Rather than just being flat out all the time.
I think the asana practice is a beautiful way to really highlight that in a female.
It's progress and restore.
Yes.
There's a time for all things. I mean, Debbie, it's been a fantastic chat. I suppose to end off, I always ask a couple of questions. I was just thinking, they're kind of like a little question, fun ones to end. And I thought, well, how can I structure this around our talk? And I thought, well, let's say, what do you do? I usually say, what's your guilty pleasure? But let's say, what would you like to, instead of that, let's say, what do you like to do when you take this time off, and during the menstruation, what do you like to do instead of practice maybe, and to look after yourself?
I love to do long meditations and chanting, because it's something that personally, because to fit my practice in the day, I don't get enough time to do long meditations. And so it's such a treat on my, on the days of my menstrual cycle, those 3 days, I take a really long, juicy meditation, and it's just, and journaling and just being
juicy
insightful.
Meditation.
Yeah. It's just so nice. And then, of course, just like watching Netflix sometimes, and just the idea of knowing that I don't need to do anything. I'm not expected to do anything. I mean, I know I'm lucky because I'm an entrepreneur, so I can, and because I chart my cycle, I know when I'm going to start my period. So I take off those first 2 days. If they're on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, I realize I'm blessed to do that. I know not all females have that option. Maybe they're mothers, maybe they have a job that's Monday through Friday. But if you have the opportunity to do it, what a gift. And I take off the practice for the first 3 days. I prioritize walks. Maybe I'll do some, some yoga asanas and stretch, but, I take off from the Ashtanga practice.
And I usually ask an inspiration, but in this case, I'm going to say, can you recommend any inspiring books around this topic or women's issues? I mean, I'm thinking Women That Run With Wolves. And I mean, I've read, I love Germaine Greer as a professor of mine at university, actually. So I've always loved Germaine Greer and her work on women. And a more recent book, I think it's The Whole Woman, I read last year, which I thought was fantastic personally. What are your inspiring, if someone's more inspired to take this topic further, what would you recommend them in terms of looking, watching?
Oh, wow. Well, reading? So if they want to know more about the menstrual cycle.
Apart from you, of course. Yeah.
I do have some books on some free books on my website about like just an overview of the menstrual cycle and what's going on. But as far as my mentors and some really great books, especially if you want to learn more about the menstrual cycle, The Fifth Vital Sign by Lisa Hendrickson-Jack is a great book. She has like a whole chapter of an index for sources. I mean, she quotes so many studies. She's really just dedicated and passionate about it. And so if you're looking for more like science-based facts, and then also it's just really beautiful. She talks a little bit about nutrition. She talks about how to chart your cycle, what your hormones are doing. I think that's a great book. And then anyone who's listening to this who might be going into that phase of perimenopause, because I know there are a lot of practitioners going through perimenopause, I definitely recommend anything by Dr. Laura Brydon. She has a book, I think it's called the Perimenopause Manual, or she has 2 books. So if you're not perimenopause before, then the Period Repair Manual, for great book. And then if perimenopause, she has one about perimenopause, and that's a beautiful book as well. Yeah,
and her site is excellent as well. And there's so much free information on her site.
Yes. So you've checked it out. That's great. So
she's very good. Yeah, I have very much.
I love her. I mean, she's just she's incredible. She's a pioneer in this field.
She is. Yeah, so definitely Laura Bryden, check her out as well. Thank you. It remains for me to say, thank you, Jenna, for coming on. And it's been a great chat. And
thank you so much, Adam.
Appreciated this chat. That's listening. Don't forget to comment if you like, or subscribe if you fancy, or whatever else you do on YouTube. And thanks again, Jenna, for coming on.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.